Welcome to another episode of the Panache cast. I'm flying solo again, but I'm delighted this time to be joined by Christina Blacklaws, who many of our viewers and listeners will recall, particularly the listeners among you, that Christina was the former president of the Law Society for England and Wales. She's also a very noted speaker. Lots of talks out there, which we will put links to on our notes, on our show notes, including a TEDx talk most recently that I could find about gender bias within law. So we'll come on to that in a bit more detail. I'm hoping that we'll cover a bit of Christina's career, some diversity in law aspects perhaps, some technology matters generally, and then maybe a bit of career advice at the end for those hungry participants in the career of law. But Christina, welcome, and thank you very much for giving up your time to come on the show.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to be here, Neil. Thanks for asking me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. Let's start then, if we can, by going through a bit of your background, a bit of your career. I've had a look through your LinkedIn profiles. I'm sure many other people will now. Take us through where you've been, if you will, and maybe pick out some highlights for yourself.
Okay, well, we don't want to spend too long on this. I have had what I would probably describe as a fairly unique career. So let me just pick out a few of the highlights. So the things that have driven me personally in my career have been around access to justice and social justice. And diversity and inclusion and innovation. So I started out as a lawyer, and I continue, I guess, to be a lawyer, although I don't practice. I haven't practiced for some time. But my first career was as a children's rights representative, and I spent a lot of my career, supporting, I hope, in a really positive way, the most vulnerable and disempowered in our society. And that fueled a lot of my interest in my representative career, which I'll talk about in a minute. But probably your viewers, your listeners, are most interested in the innovation side of things. So in the early 2000s, I set up one of the first, what we called virtual law firms, whereby we had lawyers up and down the country working through my firm, but that was empowered by the use of technology. You couldn't have done it otherwise. Yeah. In 2011, I set up with colleagues the very first alternative business structure with the Co-op Legal Services. And again, that was a wonderful opportunity from a blank piece of paper to design and develop and deliver fixed price, modular, remotely delivered services for ordinary people. And at its height, at the Co-op, we were helping 300,000 people a year with their legal problems. Then I moved back into the corporate world, and I think was probably one of the first directors of innovation, although every other person has that title now. Apologies, directors of innovation. But at a large top 100 law firm. And as I said before, at the same time as my professional career, I had a very important to me career in representative work. So right from when I was a trainee, working with Child Poverty Action Group and Rights of Women, and then on to the Law Society, through a whole range of committees and boards there, and finally, a few years ago, to be elected to be an office holder and then president of the Law Society. And I wanted to do that because I saw an opportunity to really utilise what I'd learnt and to make a difference both to my profession, which I love, but actually more importantly perhaps to society. So when I was an office holder and president, we managed to do a whole range of programmes of activity around access to justice, diversity and inclusion, and innovation, technology, and the future of legal services. Perhaps we'll come back to that. Now I spend my time as a non-executive director, so advising and supporting law firms and one LawTech business. And as you say, I do a lot of speaking. I was doing a lot of traveling around the world until recently, but now it's all like this, which is better for my carbon footprint. I do a lot of writing, and I continue to do a lot of voluntary work. So perhaps we'll come on to the LawTech UK panel and Innovate UK and other bodies that I chair.
Yeah, lots of really pioneering stuff in there, and I would guess some bravery needed in the sort of quite big jumps that you've made from one thing to the next. Interesting also that you were doing the technological aspects of the work you were doing at Co-op many years ago, and there's probably a lot that firms even today could learn from what you were doing back then. I'm sure there's
remarkable what a decision tree. That's a very powerful tool, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine. If we can start there, because we mentioned the talks, and you've done quite a few of these, and as I say, we'll put the links to some of them in the show notes later. But let's start with the TEDx talk, because that's it sounds very good being on the TEDx stage, and I'd love to know how you did that. Actually, we haven't got into that, but the invitation to come onto TEDx is quite something. That talk was focused largely. There was a large element on it of gender bias within law, and a couple of the themes that I picked out of it were, well, the statistics themselves were surprising. In that, and correct me if I get these numbers wrong, but roughly speaking, 2/3 of new solicitors are female. Mm-hmm. Less than a third, probably less than 30% of those solicitors go on to be partners, and fewer still, half of that, maybe 15% or less, go on to be the full interest equity partners, the owners of the business. Yeah. Those numbers, for females. So there's actually two imbalances there, in that there aren't very many males coming into the profession relative to females, but the ones that do come in seem to have, or at least on the statistics, a very good chance of getting into leadership positions. Well, you've done a lot of work on that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, the TED Talk was probably the most frightening thing I've ever done, in front of 1,500 people in the theatre, and also no notes. So you're not allowed notes in a TED Talk, so it was terrifying. But thank you for watching it. And what I was doing in that TED Talk was looking at systemic bias now, and yes, utilising the research that we did at the Law Society, which I'll talk about in a second. And then looking at how, if we're not really careful, we can hardwire all of that bias into future decision making because of the use of algorithms in a way which is unchecked and unbalanced. So there are sort of it's a bit of a warning, I think, really, to what our brave new world could be. The alternative to that is that we get it really right, and we can actually eradicate systemic bias from decision making. But where we are now, and as you say, that's the stats are really stark. So women have been coming into the profession in great numbers for decades. So the sort of talent pipeline has been predominantly female, and yet women are not represented in the upper echelons of our profession, particularly in terms of ownership of private practice law firms. And the bigger the law firm, the bigger the problem, actually. Right. And and I would add to that intersectionality lands a very, very heavy blow. So what we discovered through our research was that women who had another protected characteristic were doubly, triply more challenged than white women, or women who were who don't have a disability, for example. We did a lot of research. We did the largest ever survey. It was a global survey, and then we did 250 round tables for the qualitative part of the research in 19 different countries. So it gave us a really significant body of information to to answer sort of fairly simple questions about what were the barriers to women's progression in legal careers. And and no surprise here, it was bias, unconscious bias, predominantly, quite a lot of benign bias, particularly from male leaders. Now, your question about what we can do about getting young men in, I think in our profession we've got a massive issue around social inclusion, and that is really, it is vital that we start to address it. It's shameful that that we get our talent from such a limited social pool. But there's a broader question. In fact, all of these come down to societal questions, really. It's a broader question that was, why are boys not doing as well as girls academically? I don't know what the answer is to that, but I do think it's something we need to address. And also the broader societal question about women as carers. Taking up the significant load of caring either for children or for elders, and the impact that has on them and their career. We've seen that, I think, writ large recently through COVID as well. So what we discovered, though, in our research was that there were things, and particularly things that men could do to level the playing field and make sure that if they're a leader of a business, that actually they are getting the best talent to the top. And that's really by those people walking the talk, leading by way of example, and having diversity and inclusion. And I'm talking about this more broadly than just gender, but diversity and inclusion absolutely at the heart of all business decision making. It's as important as compliance, as financial competency. All of these things make up for a successful business. And I think that, again, in a post-COVID world will ring even truer, because what people are looking for is businesses that have purpose and clear values, and something that they can believe in and commit to. So I'm very hopeful that actually now is the time for diversity and inclusion to really be at the forefront of business planning and business decision making.
I suspect it is for a lot of people. Certainly those firms that are the larger ones with the big reputations are doing a lot of work on that. I know it's not just we're talking about the legal profession in itself here, but of course legal tech profession, if you were to distinguish that as a technology profession, perhaps, I think it's the same thing. We had Catherine Bamford on a little while ago, and she was pointing out a lot. There are just not very many startups that are founded by the women, or they don't get quite the same traction through, or the leadership is not quite the same. It predominantly male heavy. So it does need.
Well, they don't get the funding. So the research shows that female founders, particularly in tech, but across the board, are not getting in any way, shape or form the funding from VC funding or whatever backing that men get. So it is a massive problem.
I wonder whether that's because the funding side is also perhaps male dominated. I don't know the statistics, but certainly that's the way it's portrayed on television and so on. It's very heavily male dominated. So maybe that is it. And maybe you're right, the unconscious bias thing there. Nothing intended, but it just happens because it's built in. So we need to do something about it. And I can say that I've had unconscious bias training, and I found it quite enlightening. It's probably something that needs to be refreshed quite frequently, though. And I think
you're absolutely right, because what it can't be. In fact, it can be counterproductive if people think they tick the box. Because actually, it's it's one of these things that's so sort of hardwired into our limbic brain that we do need to constantly challenge ourselves, and to make sure that we are making decisions about other people with real awareness of our own biases, because the reality is that every single one of us walks around with a set of biases, and if we're not aware of them, if we try and negate that they exist, then we're quite dangerous actually, in making decisions about other people. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's vital that we keep this front of mind, and that we keep working on it.
Yeah. Are there any plans, do you know, to sort of revisit the research that you've done to see whether there's been a shift or a change in a pattern that you've identified? I'd love to know what, finding out and doing the research is one part of it, implementing the change is another part, and then going back and measuring whether there's been a success story at the end of it would be fascinating to know.
Yeah, well, we did a bit of that actually during the process. So we produced 3 reports which looked at the problems and the solutions. And then with the government and with all of the representative bodies in the UK, we produced a Women in Law pledge. And the pledge is a sort of distillation of everything that needed to be done to shift the needle, everything that we'd learned from the process. And so one of the ways that I'm counting success is the number of people who are signing up. Law firms, legal businesses, doesn't matter where you're based, it's an international thing, signing up to this pledge, because it's all about, ultimately it's about being transparent and being accountable. Those are the 2 qualities that we need. And if you do that as a business, if you say these are the targets we're setting, and this is what we've achieved, then it is such a game changer. So that's what I'd encourage people to do. And the research itself, probably not on the scale that we did it. Well. But if there's any academics out there who are interested in doing a piece of revising and reviewing this, then I'd be happy to talk about that.
Yeah, well, I'll ask them to get in touch if they come through to us, because it would be good to see that through. What was the name of the pledge again, so people can look it up and get involved?
It's the Women in Law pledge. Perhaps we could put a link to into this. Yeah,
we'll do
great.
That. Yeah.
And again, if anybody wants to talk to me about that, and you know what, let's put the I'll send you all the documents as well, so we put a link to those.
Right. Yes, that would be good. Now, we weren't going to talk about this, so I'll just mention it in passing before we move on to the more technological end of the discussion. But you also mentioned about bias in technology and algorithms and data input. We won't go into that in too much detail, but I want people to go to the talk and listen to that. That was the second half of the talk. So I found that really interesting and quite scary, to be honest, in what the potential outcomes for that were. Maybe we leave it at that as a teaser for people to go and look at how it works. But it got me wondering how would I disprove a piece of technology that identified me as a potential criminal when it wasn't me? That was the immediate thought that came out to me. How would I prove the technology wrong? I guess that same could be true for DNA evidence or something, which I wouldn't have a clue how to do. But it was an interesting.
There's always a big question is, in whose hands does this technology lie, and what do they use it for? So we often assume that the technology will be benign and used for benign purposes, but we just have to look at some other jurisdictions to see how technology, which is perceived to be helpful and supportive, can actually be used to abuse human rights, to control us in a way that none of us would find acceptable. And that's before you put in all the biases that the data reflects, of course, because it just reflects the biases in our society. So one to be very careful and cautious around.
Yeah, okay. I want people to go and look that up and comment on it if they can. Okay, let's move on to the more technological aspects of legal tech. You're involved in a lot of different things to do with that. Can you just take us through initially LawTech UK, your involvement in that? What is it all about?
Yeah, so when I was an office holder, we set up a number of initiatives, one with Barclays, Eagle Labs, which was the first sort of industry-specific open incubator for law. Another was that I chaired a commission looking at the use of algorithms in the criminal justice system, and we did a massive piece of work and came up with some recommendations, many of which have been endorsed by the Biometrics Commissioner, the ICO, etc. So we're still pushing on that. And the government set up what we called then the LawTech delivery panel, asked me to chair it, and I continue to do so. And the LawTech delivery panel is really there for several key purposes. One is to try and support and grow and nurture the nascent law tech industry in the UK. So we're very focused on that, and that's in part about building awareness in the sector and cross sector as well. And we are also there to support transformative innovation. So not just some sort of iterative back office work, but actually things that really transform the sector. And thirdly, to make sure that the law is right, so that the legislative and regulatory framework is correct. And on that front, one of the things that we did at the tail end of last year, which was led by one of our panel members, Sir Geoffrey Voss, who's now going to be the incoming Master of the Rolls. And that was a piece of work which ended up with a legal statement around the use of how English law looks at crypto assets and smart contracts. And the whole purpose of that is to provide legal certainty to global business. So you can utilize English law, and bring your disputes to us, and we'll be really clear, and also with our discretion as well, but really clear as to how these assets would be viewed under English law. Another thing that we're just about to start to do, is a sandbox. So this is sort of modelled on the FCA Sandbox, but the idea is to bring in really interesting propositions, and we will help and support you through. We're working with Tech Nation on this, so Tech Nation support fintech and applied AI, etc. And so in the sandbox, not only do we have great support from mentors, but we also have a business unit. We have an ethics unit, which I chair, because I think that many startup scale-ups really need support around the ethical and the regulatory issues, that they don't want to be kiboshed by that later on the development stage. And what we hope to be able to then produce out of this is some really successful businesses, but also, to go back to the legal statement, additional guidance and support, so that we can learn the lessons and then set that out as best practice. We're also setting up an online training hub, where we're collating the best of the training that is out there. And finally, the thing that I'm really excited about, because it just impacts so many people, is our SME platform. So we're setting up a dispute resolution, or we're designing a dispute resolution platform for late payments for SMEs. Now, I was amazed when I found these figures out. 99.99% of businesses in the UK are SMEs, and they employ 60% of people employed in business. And so it's huge, and 50,000 SMEs go to the wall every year, and it's largely around late payments.
Right, 50,000.
So we're building this platform to hopefully to address those issues, so that keeps these disputes out of court. It's largely self-help, the desire to be, and hopefully will be a massive support for small business.
Yeah, well, that sounds interesting. I wasn't aware of that. Is that how far along are you in that process? And
just kicked it off. We just announced this week the partners that we're working with. So we're working with Oxford University on that, and some dispute resolution, one scale up, and another fairly established businesses as well. So that's very early days, and we are really open and welcoming of particularly of those in the tech sector, who want to become a part of this, or who have expertise to bring to it, because the only way we're going to develop best practice is through a multidisciplinary approach.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can imagine that most of the SMEs that we're talking about, they just are so busy running their own business, they probably don't have time to manage claims, late payments, and it's just, for many of them, I imagine it's an afterthought, which lots of people, it ends up being a problem for them.
Yeah.
I was really interested as well what you were saying about the sort of training and the collaborative training aspect, or bringing of things together, because that information is, well, there's plenty of it around, but having it collated in one place would be invaluable. What sort of things are you pulling into that?
Well, again, it's still early days, but we're developing the scope of that at the moment. But the first thing is to do an analysis of what's out there.
Yeah.
And this analysis is also in part a gap analysis. So what's out there, what's missing, what is important for people to know across a whole range of sort of case studies, if you like. What is important for a high street business owner to know about what is technologically available to them? Do they, what do they need to understand about the use of crypto assets, or smart contracts, or digitization of conveyancing, let's say, these sorts of things. So we will, it will be very sectoral as well, so that you can find the stuff that is relevant to you and your circumstances.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's a point I wanted to pick up on. I mean, the needs of the high street firm, the smaller firm with fewer employees, versus the needs of the magic circle firms, or those big international firms, are often just not the same. The firms that are doing will writing and the conveyancing and maybe some of the debt recovery work, versus those big corporate firms that are doing the corporate jobs, the big banking jobs, they have very different needs, don't they? So it would be great to sort all that sort of information for them out.
Yes. Although there are some things that are, thematically similar as well, and in a sense, it's a sort of corporate mindset that's required, and I think there's been terrible things that have gone on over the last several months in relation to the pandemic. But one of the positives is a shift in mindset in terms of the use of and the usefulness of technology. So, I think that collectively we now are in a very different place. We've moved from just the first adopters getting it to the long tail, and actually most of the tail, whether they're high street or whether they're magic circle or anything in between, have had a very different experience of service delivery, actually, over the opens this up.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you identified in one of your talks a number of historic barriers to adoption for legal tech with firms, one of which was particularly the senior management being just much less familiar with technology. And that may still be the case, but if they are having to use Zoom or Teams, and they are having to adapt to the way they're working and file sharing electronically rather than having paper files sitting with them, I wonder if that might accelerate the adoption to some degree. I hope so. You mentioned,
I think you're absolutely right, and also, one of the things that, just to bring innovation and diversity and inclusion together, one of the key things that we found in our research was key needle shifters for diversity and inclusion was that having genuine adoption of flexible and agile working policies for everybody, not just for as a sort of mummy track, and we've lived that now, and we've lived it successfully. So firms know that they can trust their people to work from home, and that again is a real enabler, I think, of a very different way of working, and different aspirationally. You're not tied as a business anymore to your location.
Yes, I mean, I can say with some degree of certainty that the whole COVID issue has created, a very, very different working pattern for everybody, but also different opportunities for people. And I can speak very well about one woman's, my wife's working patterns in particular. She is able to work remotely now. She doesn't have to spend the time in the car. So she has an extra couple of hours a day that she can usefully be doing things. It's very easy for her to monitor the work that she does and the work that she manages of other people. So there are those sort of opportunities that weren't there before. And then when talking about the issue of children or childcare and caring for others, my experience at least is that people seem to be much more open to the idea of a slightly longer day that allows people to start earlier and potentially work later, but spread the workload beyond the 9 to 5, which means they can still do a full-time job and they aren't necessarily removed from the core working hours. Or if they are removed from the core working hours, there's a way to make up for it, so to speak. So it opens opportunities that I think weren't there before. And hopefully that will be another reason, an enabler for people to show that, notwithstanding the fact that they care for a family, they can still contribute immensely to a career.
Completely agree with that. I would add that there's no room for complacency. I was on a panel with a lawyer from Hong Kong, and she said, we've just gone back to exactly how it was. And and actually we need to work hard to embed the cultural shift, and we need to make sure that new policies are genuinely neutral. There's some really fascinating research from the Institute of Fiscal Studies which showed that mothers were 47% more likely to have either lost or given up their jobs during COVID. And actually some additional research from America said it was particularly professional women who have been hit really hard, because they had arrangements in place which made things work, but then with COVID it all fell to them. So we do need to look at what we're doing in our homes. How we're behaving as parents and as carers and towards each other to live in a truly gender balanced way as well, I think.
Yes. I just want to finish up this section if we can. Your reference to your talk at Cambridge, I think it was University or Law Society, but we'll put a link in the note.
It's the University Law Society, I think.
University Law Society, right. Well, I haven't totally lost it then, good. You mentioned in that two key words which we're very keen to get out there and express, which is open source and community. Could you tell us a bit about that? Why is that important? What does it mean?
Oh, well, another government panel that I chair is part of Innovate UK, and it's the Next Generation Services Advisory Group. And we're a body that gives out grants for collaborative research and development. And our last four grants were all around data access and data sharing, because this is utterly vital for us to be able to address. And if you ask lawyers, they are petrified about inadvertently exposing their client data somewhere that they shouldn't, and therefore, caution is the word of the day. So if we can find ways of enabling the appropriate and responsible use of data in a way that can then open up the opportunities, and that's that it's a real leveler, because we were talking before about high street and magic circle, like they're on different planets, but actually the difference is often is around the data, as the technology gets better and cheaper to analyze that data. So it's something that I think we need to solve these problems around privacy and data access, and also I think for access to justice, it's absolutely vital that in a sense, the principle should be everything should be open source, unless and if we can solve those problems around regulation and privacy, then we can do that. So I'm really excited about those opportunities then, when we've got great sets of data that are not tainted by societal bias, that we can then utilize to have such better understanding and insights, to then put that to good use with our clients, our communities, and our society.
Yeah, no, it's an exciting development, and then we're very keen on the idea of that as well. I share your optimism and enthusiasm about it. I'm keeping you longer than I'm supposed to have, so let me just finish up, if I can, quickly by saying or asking, you've had a very successful career. There'll be lots of people out there who may want to use what you've done as a blueprint. Are there any tips that you can give anybody to say, this is how I did it, or something that was slightly unique about yourself?
I guess well, let me start with this. One of my absolute favourite quotes is from the wonderful author Alice Walker, and she says that the most common way that people give up their power is by thinking that they don't have any. And I often talk to law students, used to be in person a lot, and junior lawyers, and say, recognize the power that you have. This is a very, very different environment now. That forelock tugging, hierarchical legal structuring is not something that is going to survive for much longer, and you have huge power, and therefore you can be an activist and make a difference in whatever way you want to, either for yourself in your own career, for your communities. I would say that for anybody to achieve, you do need to be really bold. You need to take risks. You need to be resilient. The number of times you get knocked down, you've got to get up again. And you do need, I think, to have a plan and have supporters of that plan. Those supporters might be at work, they might be at home, they might be anywhere. But surround yourself by the people who are there as your cheerleaders, and always ask. I'm amazed. I do lots of talks, particularly when I was president. It wouldn't be uncommon for me to do 3 or 4 a day, and I would often talk to students and say, if you need some help, ask. And a handful ever did. And I spoke to hundreds of them. Now, it may be that they thought, well, she can't help me at all, but actually, it is amazing how many people are happy to help you if if you ask them to do that, and gaining that wisdom of a group of people, as the would say in corporate land, key stakeholders who understand the environment and can give you some real insight. I think again is really a key element to success.
Fantastic. And the last point to make for me is that in your talk to the University of Winchester, you mentioned, going back to the point about gender bias in particular, how we might resolve that. You mentioned a solutions toolkit. Can you just give us a 2-minute précis on that? What is that?
Yeah. So the whole idea of this, and we'll put them in the notes. But the whole idea was to identify and keep us really focused on the relevant issues when it comes to diversity and inclusion, but perhaps more importantly, to enable every single person to become an activist. So it was a toolkit which gave really practical suggestions. We actually divided it by gender. So we had a toolkit for men and a toolkit for women, and so the things that you could do as an individual or as a small group to really make a difference. And you talked about it at the beginning about reviewing this, but we had loads of fabulous feedback about how people had utilized those toolkits and made a massive change, either for themselves. One trainee who was really courageous and applied for an NQ role in a big firm and asked for the salary that she thought she deserved, with great trepidation, having been to a BAME round table and feeling empowered by that. And not only did she get the job, but they offered her a salary higher than that she'd asked for. And she said it was so confirmatory for her. It was, she felt valued and empowered, and it was just a fantastic way for her to start her career. So we had hundreds of people's stories like that. So I would say to anybody listening that you have power. Use that power. You can you as an individual, wherever you are in your organization, you can make a difference. And what you will find if you start to talk about this, there are lots and lots of others around you who want to do the same thing.
Wonderful. Thank you. I suspect we should wrap it up there. There's lots of fabulous advice for people, lots of stuff covered, bias, technology, career advice. Wonderful. Thank you so much for giving up your time and giving the advice, Christina. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Nia. It's lovely to chat, and thank you for listening.
Pleasure. Thanks.